On a dying ranch at the edge of the frontier, Daniel Harlow stumbled upon two towering Apache sisters bleeding in his yard. To help them meant death at the hands of his own people. To turn away meant living with a coward's soul. But when dawn came, the choice he made would bind him to a fate that neither the law of men nor the law of tribes could undo. Part 1. The Giants in the Yard. The land did not care if Daniel Harlow lived or died. It stretched in every direction, with the indifference of baked stone, brittle sage, and dust that moved only when the wind bothered to lift it. A man could work this ground until his back bent like a willow, and still harvest nothing but disappointment. Daniel knew, because he had been trying for 6 years, and all he had to show were fences eaten by rot, cattle gaunt as shadows, and hands so raw with cracks they bled when he clenched them. That morning, the sky wore a thin veil of stormlight. Low gray clouds dragged across the mountains like smoke. He had been walking the line of his corral, counting the animals that hadn't died yet, when his eyes caught a shape that shouldn't have been there. At first, he thought a steer had collapsed near the mesquite. But as he drew closer, his heart stuttered. It wasn't cattle. It was a body. No, two bodies. Daniel stopped short, boots rooted in the wet dirt. Sprawled across his yard were two women. Their hair, long and black as crow wings, tangled with grass and mud. Their skin bore the bronze of the desert sun. But what arrested him wasn't their wounds or their ornaments. It was their size. The smaller of the two, if small could ever describe her, stood over 6.5 feet even when she tried to rise. Her arms, corded with muscle, looked as if they could bend iron. The taller one dwarfed even that. Nearly 7 feet of solid power, her shoulders broader than Daniel's doorway. Both wore beadwork glimmering with turquoise and silver, designs too intricate to belong to common folk. These were not strays or wanderers. These were women of rank, warrior daughters, perhaps even children of a chief. Blood marked the earth beneath them. The shorter woman's side was soaked dark, her breathing ragged and shallow. The taller one bore a gash across her brow, blood clotted against high cheekbones, though her eyes, sharp and defiant, remained open, following Daniel's every twitch. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away. A white rancher found with wounded Apache meant only one thing: a rope around his neck in the nearest town square. He had heard the stories. Men accused of harboring savages were dragged from their homes and strung from the cottonwoods. The frontier made no room for compassion. Survival was counted not by harvests but by which side of a rifle you stood on. Yet when the taller woman's lips parted, and a low, guttural sound in broken English fell out, "Help, sister," something cracked open in Daniel's chest. He thought of his own sister, buried 3 winters past, fever having burned her from the inside out. He remembered sitting helpless at her bedside, counting each failing breath. Watching these women bleed into his soil struck that same helpless chord. He dropped to his knees. His hands trembled as they touched the shorter woman's ribs, feeling the heat of fever, the slip of blood. His mind told him he was courting death. His heart told him he was still a man. "Damnation," he muttered. "All right. The chations they're den to the mark from. The chations they're bring to the pride." The taller woman tried to push herself upright. Her height, even injured, dwarfed him, her gaze level with his even as she swayed. She caught her sister's legs, lifting them with practiced care. Her strength was staggering. Together they staggered toward his cabin. Each step felt like carrying the weight of his own coffin. The cabin door loomed. He realized too late it was too narrow for the younger sister's massive shoulders. With gritted teeth and awkward maneuvering, he turned her sideways, easing her through the threshold, while rain began to spit against the roof. Inside, the cabin felt smaller than it ever had before. The women filled it, their presence bending the air. Daniel laid the wounded one onto his straw bed. Her eyes fluttered, lips whispering sounds in her own tongue. Fever was licking at her already. Infection had a scent sharp, metallic, final, and he could smell it rising. The taller woman knelt beside her sister, pressing cloth against the wound. She turned to Daniel with an intensity that made his spine stiffen. "Tala," she said, touching the injured woman's arm. Then she placed a hand to her chest. "Nayeli." Her voice, deep and resonant, rolled like thunder off the mountains. "Daniel," he answered, pointing to himself. His throat felt dry. He had just given his name to a woman who could break him in two, a stranger whose people would sooner slit his throat than share bread. They worked in silence for a while. Daniel cleaned what he could with boiled water, wrapping Tala's ribs with torn cloth from his only spare shirt. Nayeli watched every movement, her jaw hard, her eyes both suspicious and measuring. She was not pleading, she was testing. By dusk, the wind carried more than rain. Daniel stepped to the shutter, peering through a crack. Dust plumes moved along the ridge to the south. Riders, 5 of them. Their horses were restless shapes against the stormlight. "Your people?" he whispered. Nayeli followed his gaze, her body stiffening. Warriors, fear rooted in Daniel's gut. He had no illusions. If they found 2 daughters of the Apache lying in his bed, they would carve his name into a death sentence before dawn. "Why?" he pressed, voice tight. "Why are they hunting you?" Nayeli's jaw worked as she pressed her hand tighter against her sister's bandage. Finally, she spoke in halting English. "Tala," refused. "Chief's son. Marriage." Daniel blinked, not understanding. Nayeli's eyes flashed with both fury and sorrow. "He take wives, beat them, lost babies." Tala said no. "Now." She gestured toward the window, where the riders crept closer through the storm. The meaning struck him like a hammer. A woman said no, and now death had been loosed on her and anyone who sheltered her. Daniel thought of his own right, to walk away from a deal, to refuse work, to say no without consequence. For these women, the word was rebellion. Thunder cracked across the hills. The riders halted at the valley's edge, silent as carved stone. Daniel's pulse thundered harder than the sky. "How many bullets?" Nayeli asked quietly. He counted. 12 in the rifle, 6 in the pistol. Not enough against 5 warriors who knew this land better than his own skin. "They come," Nayeli whispered, eyes locked on him. "What you do now decides." "Smaggers." Her hand brushed his forearm, strong, calloused, warm. For a heartbeat Daniel felt something he couldn't name. Not pity, not plea, recognition. The door shuddered under a heavy knock. A voice, sharp and commanding, rang out in Apache, then again in English. "White man, we know you inside. Come out now." Daniel's grip tightened on the rifle. Tala moaned in fever against the bed. Nayeli rose, towering above him, her knife drawn, her shadow long across the cabin wall. The storm raged outside. Inside, silence wrapped them. The weight of every choice in his life pressed down to this single moment. If he stepped outside, he might die. If he stayed, the cabin could burn with all of them inside. Either way, dawn would not come without blood. And yet, when he looked at Nayeli's eyes, dark, sharp, unflinching, he felt a strange calm. Whatever came through that door would find him standing, not hiding. Daniel drew in a breath that tasted of smoke and rain. He lowered the bar. The door creaked open to the storm. Part 2. The Test of Truth. Rain swept sideways across the yard, hissing against the tin roof as Daniel pulled the door wide. 5 Apache horsemen waited beyond the stormlight, their ponies stamped and tossed, uneasy in the shifting wind, but the men sat unmoving, rifles slung with the casual poise of predators. Faces streaked with paint, feathers, and leather dripping with rain, They looked like shadows cut loose from the hills. The leader dismounted with slow authority. He was older than the others, his braids heavy with beads that glinted when lightning cracked. His gaze pinned Daniel where he stood, but it was Nayeli who stepped forward, her immense frame filling the doorway beside him. For a heartbeat, the storm itself seemed to pause at the sight of her. The leader spoke first in Apache, words that rolled sharp and measured. Nayeli answered with a clipped reply, her knife still glinting in hand. Their exchange was low, deliberate, but Daniel caught fragments when the leader switched to English. "You shelter them," he said, voice cold as the rain. "This makes you enemy." Daniel's throat tightened. He had known this reckoning would come, but standing there, rifle useless against 5 rifles, he felt the futility of defiance. Yet, before he could speak, Nayeli's deep voice cut through the storm. "He saved Tala," she declared, her English broken but heavy with command. "He saved her when she dying." The leader's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer until the stormlight carved the hard lines of his face. He looked Daniel up and down, as though weighing grain. "You speak?" he asked, switching to English again. Daniel swallowed. "I did what any man should. She was bleeding in my yard. I couldn't leave her." The leader's stare sharpened, searching for weakness, for deceit. "Many men leave. Many men kill. Why you help?" Daniel hesitated, then heard his own voice steady in the storm. "Because she asked. Because I could not watch someone die when I had 2 hands to stop it." A murmur rippled through the mounted warriors. The leader turned his head, barked something sharp in Apache. 2 riders dismounted, stepping toward the cabin. Nayeli tensed, knife rising, but the leader raised a hand to halt her. His eyes bored into Daniel. 3 moons passed, the leader said slowly. "My chief's daughter Kohana found near death by river. Fever. White man brought her food, medicine. Did not take reward. Did not give name. You know this?" Daniel's chest went cold. The memory crashed back, the girl by the creek, barely more than a child, gasping with fever. He had tended her until she could walk, then guided her toward Apache land and left without a word. He had not spoken of it since. "I remember," Daniel admitted, voice low. The leader's gaze hardened, then flicked toward his men. "She said white man saved her. She said name was Daniel Harlow. You are him?" The question fell like a stone. Daniel realized the riders had not come only for Nayeli and Tala. They had come for him, to test if Kohana's tale was true. "Yes," Daniel said. "I am that man." For a heartbeat, silence hung so heavy, it seemed the rain itself stopped. Then the leader gave a curt nod. He barked an order. His men stepped back, though their hands stayed near their weapons. "You will wait," the leader said flatly. "Chief Kohana comes at sunrise. He will decide if blood debt protects you, or if you die with them." With that, the warriors mounted and melted into the storm, leaving the yard empty but for hoofprints and the whisper of rain. Daniel barred the door again, his pulse still hammering. Nayeli stood tall beside him, knife lowered but eyes bright, with something fierce respect, perhaps, or relief. Tala stirred weakly on the bed, fever sweat shining against her brow. "You told truth," Nayeli said at last. Her voice carried a note he had not heard before, softer beneath the storm. "That matter. For us. For you." Daniel sank into the chair by the hearth, soaked and trembling. "Truth might still hang me," he muttered. Nayeli studied him, her towering shadow cast long by the firelight. "Or save you," she said. The night stretched long. They took turns tending Tala, changing the bandage, coaxing water past her lips. Daniel's mind raced, replaying every word. Sunrise would bring Chief Kohana, a man whose judgment held the weight of 2 worlds. Daniel had no illusions. Law in town said one thing, Apache law another. and both could kill him. At one point, near midnight, Nayeli settled by the shutter, keeping silent watch on the yard. The storm had thinned, leaving only the hiss of damp wind through the grass. Daniel, half dozing by the fire, startled when she spoke. "You fear tomorrow." He looked up. Her profile was sharp against the faint glow, high cheekbones, dark eyes like deep wells. "Wouldn't you?" She turned her head slightly, regarding him. "Fear makes man show true self. Some run, some fight, some stand." "And what about you?" Daniel asked before he could stop himself. Nayeli's lips curved not a smile. "Exactly, but the shadow of one. I stand." Silence stretched again. Daniel's chest ached with something he did not want to name. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, too tall, too fierce, too untamed for the narrow world he had been raised in. Yet, in the quiet, he felt the gravity of her presence pull at something deep within him. Dawn broke with the sound of hoofbeats. Daniel stepped outside to find the yard filling with riders, not 5 this time, but more than a dozen. At their head rode Chief Kohana himself, flanked by elders whose faces were painted with ceremonial markings. The chief dismounted with deliberate dignity. Though older, his frame bore the lean hardness of survival, and his eyes sharp, calculating, cut across the scene with unflinching authority. Marshal Dyer arrived almost at the same time, riding from the east with 3 federal men. Their badges glinted hard in the new sun, rifles ready. They reined up in the yard, and for a moment the two forces faced each other across the mud, the fragile line between law and war balanced on breath. Chief Kohana's gaze swept the scene, then landed on Daniel. "You are the white man," he said in fluent English. "The one who saved my daughter." Daniel swallowed. "I am." The chief nodded slowly, then looked to Nayeli and Tala standing behind him. "These are my daughters too. Their blood, their choices, bring trouble. But blood debt is law. 1 life saved binds us. 3 lives saved binds stronger." Marshal Dyer cut in, spurring forward. "That man broke federal law by harboring hostiles. Your customs don't mean a thing here." Chief Kohana's eyes did not even flick toward him. "Treaty signed last winter says otherwise. Your own governor put his mark. Apache law stands where Apache blood is judged." The yard grew so still Daniel heard his own breath. "Then tell me, Chief," Dyer snapped. "What happens to him? To them?" The chief's gaze swept Daniel, Nayeli, Tala. His eyes were sharp as flint, yet unreadable. Then he spoke with the calm of a man placing a stone that would ripple through generations. "At sunrise," he said, "I will decide, and my decision will bind you all." Part 3. Between Two Laws. The sun had barely broken the ridge when the yard filled with the weight of 2 worlds. Apache elders stood silent in their painted solemnity, their ponies tethered along the fence line. Across from them, Marshal Dyer's men spread out with rifles angled low, their fingers twitching near triggers. Between those lines of tension stood Daniel Harlow, 1 man, 2 women towering at his side, and a fate balanced on words not yet spoken. Chief Kohana stood motionless at the center, his hand resting lightly on the head of his horse. His presence carried the gravity of stone cliffs, immovable and old. His eyes never left Daniel, though his words moved toward Dyer first. "You claim law," Kohana said in perfect English, his voice quiet but edged with iron. "But law signed by your governor says Apache judgment stands in Apache matters." Dyer scowled. Rain from the night clung to his mustache, dripping as he leaned forward in the saddle. "Harboring fugitives is no tribal matter. This rancher is a settler under federal rule. That makes him mine." Kohana's gaze shifted back to Daniel. "You are man of 2 paths. Saved my daughter, saved my daughters again. Blood debt binds you, but law of whites binds you too. Which you claim?" Daniel felt the yard tighten. Every eye, painted or pale, pressed weight onto his shoulders. His hands, calloused from years of fence posts and wasted labor, felt too small to hold so much. His throat closed, but he forced the words out anyway. "I claim truth," he said. "I helped, because it was right. Not for law, not for treaty, for life." Nayeli, beside him, straightened to her full immense height. Her hand brushed the hilt of her knife, though her eyes never left her father. "He speaks plain," she said. "He risked all." The murmurs among the Apache rose. Some nodded, others frowned. The elders shifted, their feathers swaying like tall grass. Marshal Dyer's laugh cut across them, sharp as broken glass. "You hear that? A confession. He admits harboring hostiles. Enough talk." He raised a hand to signal his men, but Kohana's voice lashed through the yard like a whip. "Hold." The command was not loud, yet every man froze as if struck. Even Dyer's horse tossed and stamped nervously under the weight of it. Kohana's eyes burned as he took a step closer. "My daughters speak of refusal," he said, "of a chief's son who takes wives and breaks them. This is truth that stains my lodge. If I punish them for saying no, then I punish honor itself. But if I let them go unjudged, others say I show weakness." His gaze shifted again to Daniel. "And you, white man, you stand in middle, with no shield but truth. So I make test. The clients within the steins, and the now the destined from server as inversed." He turned, raising his hand to the sky. One of the elders stepped forward, carrying a shallow bowl carved of stone. Inside glowed embers, wrapped in sage, smoke curling upward. Another brought a knife with a handle of bone. The ritual carried the weight of centuries. "Blood speaks," Kohana said. "Words lie, bullets lie. But blood tells truth." Daniel's stomach nodded. He understood enough. The test would not be words, but proof. Nayeli's dark eyes met his. There was no plea in them, only challenge. She would not shield him from this. He felt the air grow thick as Kohana held out the knife. "Cut hand," the chief commanded. "Blood in fire. If smoke rises clear, you speak true. If black, you lie. Then law decides." Dyer scoffed. Superstition. But even his voice carried unease. The elders' faces were stone. The ritual older than Dyer's badge, older than the treaties themselves. Daniel's hand shook as he reached for the knife. He had split wood, carved fence rails, butchered cattle, but never had a blade felt so heavy. He pressed the edge across his palm, flinched at the sting, watched red well up. Nayeli reached forward, her massive hand steadying his wrist, guiding it over the bowl. Her touch was warm, grounding. Together, they let the drops fall onto the embers. Smoke curled upward. For a moment, it hung thick, gray, twisting in the dawn. Then it thinned, rising pale and almost translucent into the sky. A murmur rippled through the Apache line. The elders nodded, their approval solemn. Kohana's eyes narrowed, but he inclined his head. "Truth," he said. "Blood does not lie." Relief punched through Daniel's chest, but it was short-lived. Dyer spurred his horse forward, face dark. "Enough games. Truth or lie, this man broke federal law. I'll drag him to the gallows myself." Nayeli stepped forward, towering over the horse, her knife gleaming. "You try," she said in a voice low and dangerous, "and you not live to see next Sunday." The yard bristled, rifles lifted, hands tensed. One wrong twitch and blood would soak the mud. Kohana raised his hand again. "Stop." The silence that followed was taut as wire. Slowly, deliberately, the chief turned to Dyer. "You speak of law. I speak of treaty. Both bind us. So let both judge." He gestured to Daniel. "You are bound to my people now. Not by adoption alone, but by choice. If you accept, you live under Apache law as son, brother, protected. If you refuse, you walk out that gate to the white man's law and hang. The choice fell like thunder. Daniel felt every gaze burn into him. He looked at Tala, pale but breathing steady now. He looked at Nayeli, tall and unflinching, her dark eyes locked on his. A man's life could be cut short by storm, by bullet, by hunger. But this was a knife drawn across the soul. He heard himself whisper, "If I accept, what then?" Kohana's face was unreadable. "Then you take my daughters as sisters, my people as yours. You eat at our fire, fight at our side, betray once, and death is swift. But honor binds you." Dyer spat into the mud. "You'll let a savage law protect him? He's ours." Kohana's gaze sharpened. "Your treaty says otherwise. Do you break your own word, Marshal? If so, then war comes by your hand, not mine." Dyer's mouth worked, but no sound came. His men shifted uneasily, the weight of treaties heavier than bullets. The storm broke again, not in the sky but in Daniel's chest. His ranch had been nothing but failure. His people had turned their backs on him long ago. But here, in the eyes of giants, in the test of blood and fire, he had found a measure of worth he had never known. "I accept," Daniel said. His voice carried further than he expected, steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I accept your law." A stir went through the Apache, like wind through pine. Nayeli's shoulders eased, though her gaze never left his. Tala's lips parted, whispering something in their tongue that Daniel could not understand but felt was blessing. Chief Kohana nodded once, a slow, heavy gesture. "So be it. From this dawn, Daniel Harlow is son to Kohana, brother to Nayeli and Tala. Under Apache law, blood for blood, life for life." The words struck like a hammer against the yard. Dyer cursed, wheeled his horse, barked orders to his men. But even he knew the truth. Treaties signed in ink could not be burned away in a day without consequence. Daniel felt the weight of the chief's hand on his shoulder, heavy as stone, binding as iron. For the first time in years, he felt something other than failure. He felt belonging, terrible, dangerous, undeniable. Yet, as the warriors dispersed, as Dyer rode off cursing promises of federal investigations, Daniel caught the faintest glimmer in Kohana's eyes, something unreadable, something that hinted the test was not over. And in the silence after, when the yard emptied and the morning sun bled gold across the valley, Nayeli turned to him. Her voice was low, but it pierced him deeper than any blade. "You are brother now," she said. But the way her eyes lingered made him wonder if brother was the only path fate had set for them. Part 4. The Chief's Gambit. Dusk crept down the valley, shadows lengthening until the cottonwoods looked like black ribs against the dim sky. The Apache Council gathered in a great crescent, elders on blankets, women in shawls whispering prayers, young warriors standing taut with rifles in hand. At the center stood Chief Kohana, face stern as carved stone, waiting for all voices to settle. Daniel felt the weight of his rawhide necklace as if it were a chain, his pulse heavy in his throat. Beside him, Nayeli loomed like a mountain pillar, watching everything with silent fire. Then, Marshal Dyer rode into the circle with 7 deputies at his back. Horses stamped the earth, the smell of sweat and iron spreading through the camp. Dyer's badge caught the lamplight. He called out that a settler had died, that Apache blood was guilty, that Daniel was harboring fugitives. His words cut across the council like spurs across a horse's hide. Murmurs rose, the crowd stirred. Daniel gripped his rifle tighter, knowing one spark could set everything aflame. Kohana answered not with rage but with testimony. He beckoned women forward, faces scarred not by war, but by cruelty closer to home. One spoke of promises made and broken by the chief's son, another of gifts turned to shackles, another of babies lost. Each story fell into the circle like a stone into water, rippling outward until even the young warriors lowered their eyes. At last, Nayeli stepped forward, her height eclipsing the lamplight. Tala said no. I said no. He came with rope and fire. We bled, we fled, but we will not bow. Her words carried both fury and truth, and the circle hushed. Dyer spat in the dust. Stories and shadows, he sneered. But Kohana turned to Daniel. You saved them. Tell us. Daniel's voice was rough but steady as he spoke of storm, of blood on the porch, of how Nayeli carried her sister with strength beyond reason. He told it plain, no flourish. And though Dyer barked that truth won't stand in a court of law, the Apache listened with silence that carried weight. Then hoofbeats thundered. From the darkness burst a posse of settlers, shouting curses, firing too soon. Smoke tore the air. Horses screamed. Bullets clanged against shields and wood. Apache rifles cracked in calm rhythm, each shot deliberate. Daniel raised his own gun and fired to protect the cabin where Tala lay. Nayeli struck a rider from his saddle with the sheer force of her shoulder, scattering men who thought her no more than legend. For a moment, the yard became chaos flame, dust, lead, and cries, but the Apache circle held. The posse, reckless and drunk on fear, broke apart against discipline. When the smoke thinned, only silence remained. Through it all, Chief Kohana had not moved. Now he lifted his hand, and every rifle lowered. The yard froze. His voice was clear. A daughter is not a goat to be traded. Consent is the only cord that binds. Then he turned to Daniel, and his eyes were sharp as flint. This morning I bound you to me as a son. Tonight I release that bond unless another stronger one replaces it. A covenant of exchange. Husband and wife, two fires joined. The circle inhaled as one. All eyes went to Nayeli. She stood unshaken, her gaze locked on Daniel. For a long moment she was silent, until Daniel, his throat tight but his heart steady, whispered, I choose you. Nayeli's reply came like stone breaking water. Then I choose you. Murmurs rippled, shawls fluttered. Kohana gave a single nod. At dawn, before fire and sun, you will seal it. Even Dyer, grinding his teeth, had no argument against the treaty's words. The law was outnumbered by truth. That night the circle dispersed, but Daniel and Nayeli kept vigil by the fire. The knife of ritual gleamed in the lamplight. The air smelled of smoke and cedar. They did not speak much. The choice had already been made. They sat shoulder to shoulder, listening to coyotes in the hills, waiting for the sun that would rise not only on a new day, but on a bond no bullet could unmake. Part 5. Dawn of Two Fires. The first rays of sun climbed the notch in the cottonwood, slow and unblinking, as though the world itself wanted to watch. Dew clung to the grass in tiny mirrors, trembling when boots pressed past. The yard of Daniel Harlow's cabin yesterday, a place of mud and blood, a crucible of two laws colliding today, had been turned into a circle of witness. Elders in painted shawls formed one arc, federal deputies another. Between them stood Kohana, carved from light and shadow, his daughters flanking him like the pillars of a gate. Tala leaned against a post, wrapped in a blanket, pale but upright. Nayeli was bare-shouldered, except for beadwork across her chest, hair braided with feathers that whispered in the new wind. She looked like a force born from the land itself, tall enough that dawn had to climb her frame before it touched anyone else. Daniel stood opposite her. The rawhide necklace hung heavy against his chest, and the knife Kohana had given him rode his belt. He had not slept. He had spent the long night hearing every crack of hoof, every sigh of injured timber, every beat of his own heart trying to remind him he was still alive. Now the chief lifted his hand. The sun is witness, he said. The notch receives it. The covenant of exchange waits. They want to accept it does contagion of the education. The propers, the words gathered in the stillness. Even Dyer's men were hushed. The lawman himself had chosen to lean silent against his horse, though anger still pinned his jaw tight. Kohana turned first to Nayeli. "Daughter, you speak." Nayeli stepped forward, each movement deliberate, controlled, immense. Her voice carried like thunder softened by distance. "I choose Daniel Harlow, not as brother, not as son, but as man who stood when running was easier. I choose him because he looked at me and saw not fear, not hatred, but truth. If I take him, it is because my heart commands, not because my father commands." The ground seemed to lean with her words. Daniel felt something in his chest stretch taut, then break open. Kohana nodded once, slow. He turned to Daniel. "Son who would be husband, speak." Daniel cleared his throat, but the words that came were steady. "I choose Nayeli, not because of law, not because it saves me. I choose her because when death knocked on my door, she knocked louder. Because when fear tried to hollow me, her courage filled me. If I take her, it is because I cannot imagine the land without her shadow across it." A murmur stirred the circle, a rustle of approval from Apache, a silence of wary respect from settlers. Kohana lifted both hands. "Then let fire witness, and live it in 9 days, and become sintered cruved de stains." An elder stepped forward, carrying a clay bowl in which coals glowed red. Another placed 2 branches across it, one stripped of bark, pale and thin, the other dark, thick, braided with sinew. They flared and snapped when laid together, sparks darting into the morning air. "2 fires," Kohana said. "Separate, they burn alone. Together, they make flame stronger." He turned to Daniel. "You will tend this fire. You will keep it. If it dies, you die to us." Daniel nodded. "I will." Nayeli reached forward and, with hands that could have crushed stone, lifted the bowl. She held it between them, and the heat brushed Daniel's face, a promise and a warning. Then, in a motion both simple and monumental, she passed it into his waiting arms. The council exhaled. Women let their shawls slip back from their shoulders. Boys whispered, and were hushed with smiles instead of scolds. Chief Kohana spread his arms. "Witness, by our law, by the treaty your governor signed, by the fire that sees all Daniel Harlow and Nayeli are bound." The cry that followed was not a cheer, not exactly. It was a release of breath held for too long. Ululations from women, deep-throated shouts from men, the stamping of ponies, the clatter of Dyer's horse, as even it responded to the charge in the air. Marshal Dyer cursed under his breath, but he did not raise rifle or warrant. He knew the treaty better than anyone here. He had lost, and worse, he had lost by the rules he claimed to serve. His deputies looked to him for command, and found only silence. Kohana stepped closer to Daniel, voice low enough that only the 2 of them and Nayeli could hear. "You carry 2 burdens now. You will be tested more than once. Remember, truth is not shield enough if you do not also wield it as blade." Daniel met his eyes. "I'll remember." Nayeli's hand brushed his, strong, warm, unashamed. In that small contact, the noise of the yard fell away. He saw a path not of ease, but of belonging. Tala, pale but smiling faintly from her blanket, called out in English that carried like silver, "Then let him fetch wood. A fire must eat." Laughter rippled, light after heavy. The ceremony closed with food and song, as was law, but Daniel felt each note as if hammered into him. He carried bowls, sat by men who a day ago might have cut him down, and realized that everything in him had shifted. When the sun rose fully above the notch, Kohana announced what would ripple beyond this yard. "The Harlow Ranch is now place of trade, place of meeting, protected by Apache law and white law both. Any who spill blood here, spill blood against treaty." The words set precedent. They planted a flag deeper than iron posts. That night, as the new fire burned between them in the cabin yard, Daniel and Nayeli sat in silence, watching the sparks twist into the stars. Tala slept against the wall, her breathing stronger. Beyond the fence, sentries rode lazy circles, not for fear but for custom. Daniel looked at the fire, then at Nayeli's face lit orange by it. "Strange," he said softly. "I thought I'd lost everything, but it feels like I was empty until now." She turned her gaze to him, eyes reflecting flame. "You were waiting," she said. "Now you are found." Above them, the cottonwood leaves clapped in the night wind. Beyond them, the land stretched endless, no less harsh than yesterday but suddenly bearing a promise it had never carried before. And when dawn came again, it came to 2 fires instead of 1. If the tale of Daniel Harlow, Nayeli, and Chief Kohana has left its mark on you, then you know the frontier was never just a line on a map. It was a place where truth cost blood, where love defied law, and where 2 fires could burn brighter together than apart. In the Old West, survival meant more than bullets and fences. It meant standing for what was right when both worlds demanded you bend. And sometimes, the bravest step a man could take was not toward war, but toward belonging. Subscribe and ride with me into the next story where dawn brings reckonings, where hearts choose louder than guns, and where the Old West stories remind us that even in dust and shadow, hope still rises.